hold yourself accountable to identify the areas where you need to spend the time and then spend it there. And oftentimes, the place that we need to spend the time are on the things that we can control. Because you can't spend time on things you can't control. It's not going to be very good time spent. Chad Peterman here, and you are listening to Can't Stop the Growth, a platform for leaders and teams to grow and thrive. We highlight the importance of personal development, pursuing greatness, and always chasing your potential. Let's get into it. Today, I want to talk a little bit about something that I feel like can have a negative kind of connotation to it, but I think if we reframe how we look at it, I think it can be a really powerful thing. I wrote a lot of this, or at least the outline of this, as I was in our new leadership class, which I'm super excited. I think we've got quite a few people now that are progressing through it. I sat through the last piece of it on Monday. And as I was sitting in there, I was like, okay, I think there's a lot of things in here that I think are really cool to potentially unpack and that we can relate. And the biggest thing that I took away from the class and that I'd like to talk a little bit about today is accountability. So when we think about accountability, probably even when I just said it, there was a somewhat negative reaction, right? It's like, oh, accountability. And I can honestly tell you, I wrote it probably 3 or 4 times on this page. I had the same reaction as I was writing down my notes, right? Because accountability is typically viewed from a perspective of, oh, I'm not doing something right, I'm off track, I'm not where I should be, and thus either I have to hold myself accountable, or even worse, someone else is going to hold me accountable. So I think we have to understand that accountability is not a negative thing. Now, there are ways that you as a leader, or you even leading yourself, can frame it in a negative fashion. And I want to touch on a few of those things today about how do we frame this and how do we need to view accountability and to unpack its power, right? Like, how do we really get that in a position where we can use it for fuel rather than a negative and ultimately probably discouraging us or putting us in a really bad place. And I think the biggest piece of that is understanding that whether you're in a leadership role and you're having to hold your team accountable, or you're holding yourself accountable, at the end of the day, the most important thing to keep in mind, at least for me, is to understand why it is that you are using accountability. And I think that the biggest reason, and what we need to understand, is that it is for the person being held accountable. It's not for you as the manager. It's not for you to hit your goals. It's not for you to hit your KPIs. It's for that person. It's for them. You are doing it. You are holding them accountable because you want to see them succeed. You want to see them do better. And there's a number of things that you can do to frame up that conversation correctly. And when you frame it correctly, guess what? That becomes the culture in whatever area you're leading or department or whatever it is. That becomes the culture. Accountability becomes a good thing. It becomes something that I don't know what I would do without it. And we've all been in places like that, right? If you're trying to achieve a new goal, you know that it's for you, but what do we oftentimes do? We ask someone else to hold us accountable. If I had a nickel for every time I said that during the week, like, all right, I'm going to need you to hold me accountable because I know I'm not real good at this. If you see me veering off, you have permission to say something to me and let me know, hey, get back on track there, knucklehead. And so the root of accountability is either to take ownership yourself or transfer ownership to that person. We want them to own that accountability. You as a leader can't own their accountability. You can't want success more than they want it. And oftentimes that is a result of you having that conversation to benefit yourself rather than that person. So there's 4 things that I think, as it relates to accountability, that you can do for yourself or you can do as a leader of others. But there are 4 things that I think if you keep these in mind, accountability becomes a positive. Accountability becomes kind of that way to supercharge your success. And the first one is to create possibilities that you yourself or the person you're leading may not see. So let's take a look at that. I'm a huge sports fan. I was watching some golf on Sunday. My kids were throwing things at me, which is not a very conducive environment to watching golf. But as I was watching it, I naturally go down a rabbit hole of pulling up on YouTube, because you can pull it up on your TV now, which is so cool. But you can pull it up on your TV, and I go back and watch like past tournaments. And I know, I already know the result, but it's so interesting to watch. Anyway, as I was watching this, I'm sitting there with Julian, and we're watching it, and he doesn't really know what's going on, but he knows the word golf. So he's somewhat entertained. And so what I'm thinking about is guys like Tiger Woods, and you think about all the best athletes, but Tiger's probably one of my favorite athletes of all time just because of what he did in comparison to everyone that he played with or that played before him or that plays now. Like, the stats are just staggering. And I think about that, and what it immediately brings me to as it relates to creating possibilities is he didn't just break records, like he demolished them. Like, just absolutely, like, if this was the standard, he did it like 10 times better than everybody else. And if you think about it, he's playing the same exact game as everybody else, yet he's 10 times better than everybody else. So how is that? How is that possible? How can someone be that much better? I always think about it like he had the exact same amount of time. Frankly, he had less time when he won early because he was only 20 some odd years old. So if you think about his whole life and the number of hours that he had to be good as he was, well, he didn't have near as much time as someone who was 30. So if he didn't have as much time, what propelled him to be that much better? The other thing about golf is if you look at a golfer, none of them are like super physically imposing. Like, most of them are literally like 5'7". Now, I say 5'7" like it's short. I'm not much taller than that, but we're all collectively under 6 foot tall, okay? So not like super like, oh my God, well, yeah, if I was 6'7", I could do this. Like, they're just regular people. Like, they weigh like 160 pounds, some of them. So why are they so good? Well, to me, what that is a result of is how they've held themselves accountable throughout their life. Because the only way to get better at golf and the only way to stay bad, to get better, you got to play more and you got to practice more. To stay bad, you don't play as often. It's pretty simple. And that's why I like it. It's like, okay, well, if I play and practice a hell of a lot more, I'm going to get better. You know, here in Indiana, unfortunately, we can play during the summer, and then we got to take months off, and that's what I always lean my game on, is if I could play all year round, think about how good I could be. But when we think about this, like from an accountability standpoint, what they did was they created these possibilities that they couldn't see, that weren't out there. So where in your goal setting are you not setting, 1, setting a goal, and 2, are you dreaming outside of the box? So what would it take, if it can be done, what would it take to get there? How would I have to change? How would I have to hold myself accountable on a daily basis? Oftentimes we revert to, well, it's probably because this. Oh, it's probably because of that. Oh, well, they did this. Guess where that's going to get you? A whole lot of nowhere. And again, holding yourself accountable, we don't want to do it in that situation. Because why? We know we may come up short. Guess who cares? No one. And that's okay. So why are we scared of holding ourselves accountable? You're the only one that matters. So if you set a goal and you come up a little bit short, think about how much better you got. You know, we often talk about, or I do, about, hey, set your first goal. When you write it down, then double it and figure out what you need to do to get there. And don't get discouraged along the way, but again, hold yourself accountable. When we get discouraged, we drop the accountability and start to make excuses. And by we, I mean all of us. How do we create those possibilities? Well, you got to dream. You got to be okay with doing that. You don't need anything to do it. You can do anything in this world. It's just a matter of holding yourself accountable to oftentimes the things that you already know that you need to do. Think about it. If you wanted to have a better month than you've ever had before, you already know what to do. And you already know the excuses that you're already thinking about of why you can't. Throw those out the window and just focus on the things that you already know how to do. The next one is along those same lines. Control what you can control. It sounds easy, right? Can you control getting up early every morning and going to work out? Yes. Can you control building 6 options on every call? Yeah, you can. You know, I was looking at some numbers. This is just a fun stat here that I'm excited about. So I was looking at something, and from January to February, a technician in January produced $224. You know how many times he offered 6 options? 21% of the time. Same technician. So my guess, just guessing, is he didn't wake up on February 1st and become some drastically new human. Can we all agree? Probably the same person on the last day of January that he was on the first day of February. But you know what he did? He controlled what he can control. You know, in February, he did $11,000. I don't know what percent increase that is, but it's a lot. You know how many times he offered 6 options? 97% of the time. I didn't see him run a single call. But what I do know is it seems like he controlled what he could control. He didn't become a new person. He just simply followed the process. You know another cool stat about that? In January, he ran 84 calls. In February, he ran 38. He ran half of the calls. Because what do we use as excuses? I need more calls. I need better calls. They only sent him 38 calls. You know why? Because he was selling work and probably doing it. He didn't have time to run another 40 calls. He was probably home a lot earlier as well. He probably didn't even work nearly as many hours, but I bet you he made more money. Actually, I'm fairly certain he did. Follow the process. It works. Control what you can control. If you do that, the best part about it is you get to own everything. When we take ownership, we take control. Would you rather be out of control? Because that's what happens when we start blaming customers and calls and the amount of calls and this and that and the other. Just own it. The second or the third thing to remember as we think about accountability is what got you here won't get you there. There's a book about it. I've read it. It's good. I think it's actually titled that. What got you here won't get you there. So if that technician that we just talked about, field professional, sorry, working on it, if he had done the same exact thing in January, or if he had done the same exact thing in February that he did in January, what do we think his results would be? Because we all agreed he didn't become a different person. This is the same gentleman. He had to change. And we all hate change, right? Why? Because what got us here won't get us to where we're going. You know the other part about change is if we don't control what we can control, if we don't follow that process, change becomes more rapid and it's out of control because you never create the control group. Anybody remember biology from high school? Yeah, you got to have a control group that you know what it's doing, and then you have the variable and you see what's going on. Well, if you don't control the things that you can control, if we're constantly making an excuse or thinking that everyone's against us or whatever it may be, guess what? We can't create a control group. We don't know if the process actually freaking works and what to change. The same thing goes for the goals that we set. So what do you need to change? What things in your process, in your life, the things that you know that you need to do to reach your goal, what do you need to hold constant? So that then you can figure out, all right, this is what I'm doing now. Now I'm going to make small changes along the way to get where I want to get. Because that process, those things that I was doing, they won't get me over there. They'll get me to a certain point, but then you'll probably plateau, right? We've all been there. You work at it, and then you hit a wall. And then you got to change a little bit. And that's okay. But if you never knew what you were doing in the first place, if you weren't working to control all of the things that you can control, then how are you ever going to get there? You know, I think about this on a daily. If I were out as a field professional, the 3 things that I would focus on that I know would guarantee me success in some form or fashion, because I am not a great talker to people. Once I'm comfortable with you, I'll have a conversation. But the 3 things that I would focus on are, I would build 6 options on every call, because I know I can do that. Come hell or high water, I can build my 6 options. I can get a review, and I can put a yard sign out. If I do those 3 things, I'm going to win. I'm going to fall into winning. Because if the customer is willing to give me a review and let me put a yard sign in, guess what? I probably built a relationship with them in some form or fashion, even though it was uncomfortable for me. And I can control all 3 of those things. What are the other things that you can control? What are the other things that, regardless of who the customer is, regardless of what's happening, regardless of what type of call it is, regardless of all these things, what are those things that you know before you even arrive at the house, you can control? Do those things. If you're leading a group, what are the things at the start of the day that you know that the people on your team need to do? You do this and this and this, and if we miss one of these, guess what? We're opening ourselves up to something we can't control. What are all the things that we can control? And go control them. Because then you have a hell of a lot more ownership over the result that you get. The last one, and probably the most important, is patience on results, urgency on action. You know, that same technician that we talked about, what if he would have done another $224 in February? But his options moved. So his options moved from 21 to 97, and he's still getting the same result. We know it's not the options. All right, we got a variable. He's controlled that piece of it, right? We know that that's good. Now we got to dive in and figure out what else is going on. What else can we improve? Where else can we be? You see, this is, I use the example because it is so unbelievable. The technicians that move from 21 to 97, we can work with them because they're controlling what they can control. We know that. So now we can start to go in and help them in other ways so that they get that. Because we've got to have patience with the result. Everybody set out on a big goal. What do they say? January 24th, most depressing day of the year, because that's the day when everybody quits their New Year's resolution. Because we don't see the result. Any goal worth setting, if you see the result in a month's time, probably wasn't big enough. The cool thing about this technician is if that's the result he saw in a short time, think about what he's going to look like at the end of the year if he keeps working the process. It's going to be pretty cool. Because right now, he's on a path to go from not great to potentially having maybe the best result in a month that we've ever seen. And if anybody remembers what, this was a HVAC maintenance technician. If anybody remembers what February looked a lot like it does today. Not great. But the thing that he did was he had urgency with his action. right? It was like, oh crap, let's flip this. I can control, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. If you want to see results, urgency has got to be your number one priority. We've talked about it a lot. If you want results, move quick. Because guess what? You control that. You control the speed at which you move. That doesn't mean reckless. That just means do the things that you already know how to do and do them now. Don't wait. What are you getting from waiting? You don't have anything to lose. Maybe a little bit uncomfortable today, but guess how you'll feel next month? Pretty damn good. The key that will separate those that accomplish what it is that they want to accomplish in life is the urgency with which they carry out their day. But if you start today rather than you start in June, you're going to be a hell of a lot better off. Urgency. Urgency. How do you move? How do you go? I remember in college, my teammates probably hated me, but that was always my thing, right? Like, it was, we need to have urgency at practice. This is the way that we go. Where most people, we practice at the end of the day from like 3 to, 5 or something like that. I can't remember. After class and all this stuff, and we go out, practice. Some days it's hot, some it's cold, whatever. And you go out there, and it was like, all right, we need to go. Like, we need to play. We need to practice like we're going to play. Because if we don't, well, you're going to not play well on Saturday. So you need to figure this out. And it was something that I always, even in my position group, like that was something I always led. Like, hey, we got to go. Like, it's game speed. Let's move. Let's be quick. And it took them a little while, but they caught on. And that's how we wanted to operate. That's what we were going to do. And I just think that piece is something that in anything in life, if you can master a sense of urgency, there isn't anything that you can't accomplish. Nothing. I mean, like, you may think you can't, but I'm pretty sure you can. So where do you need to be more urgent? Where can you put that into your life and reap the rewards of moving fast? Hold yourself accountable to identify the areas where you need to spend the time and then spend it there. And oftentimes, the place that we need to spend the time are on the things that we can control. Because you can't spend time on things you can't control. Well, you could. It's not going to be very good time spent. So as we think about accountability, we think about creating possibilities for ourselves outside of what we thought's possible. We understand that there are certain things we can control, and there are certain things that are out of our control. We have influence over what we can control. We have zero influence over what we can't. So when we understand that, well, then accountability becomes pretty easy, right? Because I know that I can do the things that I can control. That can be done. Now I can progress forward. And I can navigate around the things that I can't control. And then as we're navigating, we understand that we will have to change course. We will have to make modifications to our approach. But when we have a process and we follow it and we're controlling all the things that we can control, it's easier to move. It's easier to change things up and try a different, like just a slightly different variation of something to see if that may work a little bit better when you're holding everything else in control. And then as we're moving down the path and as we're navigating and doing what we can do, we have to have patience. We have to have patience when we're looking at the result. Because the result, if we set the goal right, will take a while to get there. But we have urgency with our actions. That is how we turn accountability from a negative to a positive, and we use it to fuel our growth. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.